Welcome. Thank you so much for watching this webinar. I am so excited to be talking about early writing today. My main focus had always been on reading intervention. A couple of years ago, a grade 1 teacher came to me because she had 4 students who produced very little written output, and she wanted to know if I could help them. I administered my usual assessments, but these were really focused on reading. I was determined to help these students, so I began to investigate early writing. I wanted to know what influenced written output and what sort of remediation I could provide for these students. Today, I will share what I learned with you. We will begin by examining the phases that children progress through as they learn to write. We will look at the foundational skills of writing and how to develop and assess written fluency. I've seen these phases in numerous texts and websites. It is important to note that these phases can overlap and that children progress through them at different rates. I've based the following slides on the Reading Rockets website and the website from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And I've illustrated them with examples I collected from students at my school. In this first phase, children attribute meaning to their scribbles and drawings. They begin to mimic writing. Next, you start to see shapes that resemble letters, such as circles and lines. There are no connections to phonemes yet. In this phase, you see random strings of letters or approximation of letters. Sometimes there are spaces indicating word awareness. In the next phase, you will see letters with spaces between them to resemble words. The first phoneme of a word may be represented. In the invented spelling or phonetic spelling phase, meaning is attributed to approximations of words. A phoneme-grapheme connection is beginning. Typically, the initial and final phonemes in words are represented. In the transitional phase, you see a mixture of correctly spelled words and invented spelling. You also see some correctly spelled high-frequency irregular words such as the or is. At this point, children begin to experiment with punctuation and sentence formation. Finally, in the conventional phase, almost all words are spelled correctly, most punctuation is correct, and there are spaces between words. What is it that prevents some children from continuing along the path to conventional writing, or to simply produce only very small amounts of written output? After doing research in an attempt to answer this question, I found that there can be difficulties in 2 main areas that result in slow to no written output. First of all, cognitive functions, working memory and executive functioning. And second, a lack of consolidation with the foundational skills, and sometimes a combination of both. Working memory allows us to hold items in our mind and manipulate them. When students write, they need to remember letter formation, spelling, the sentence they are writing, punctuation, paragraph structure, and the content of what they are writing about. That takes up a great deal of working memory. Executive function is another cognitive element required for effective writing. It is a collection of cognitive processes in the brain. These abilities can have a significant impact on students' ability to write. While we can't remediate working memory and executive functioning specifically, we can remediate skills that will help to reduce the strain on these brain functions by ensuring that the foundational skills of writing are automatic. Joan Sedita captures the skills needed for writing in her writing rope graphic. You can see that her diagram mirrors Scarborough's reading rope. The transcription skills, spelling, and handwriting are identified as the foundational skills needed for writing. Authors Coker and Ritchie, Dr. Stephen Pfeiffer, Susan Carricker, and many other researchers also identify handwriting and spelling as the foundational skills for writing. So I decided to make the consolidation of these skills the focus of my intervention with my slow writers. First, we will look at handwriting. I read Coker and Ritchie's book, Teaching Beginning Writers, which I found extremely helpful. I also reviewed Dr. Stephen Pfeiffer's book, The Neuropsychology of Written Language Disorders, along with a number of studies I had collected on the relationship between handwriting and later writing success. Consider the working memory demands of just printing. There's grapheme retrieval, which means picturing what letter or group of letters go with the phoneme or sound they are trying to write. Letter formation and orientation, placement in lines, spacing between letters and words. If they struggle with any of those skills, they won't be able to focus on spelling or sentences. These skills need to be both fluent and automatic. Fluency is accuracy and rate or speed. Automaticity is being able to do something without thinking about it. Both are needed to free up working memory. Have you ever noticed that the students with really nice printing tend to also be strong writers? So, where do you start? Ideally, you want your students to use a tripod grip to prevent fatigue and cramps. There's actually quite a range of acceptable grips, but I'm not going to go through all of those today. They are described on many occupational therapy websites. Correcting an incorrect grip may be extremely difficult, but it is worth giving it a try. You want to teach and review the correct grip by demonstrating something called pencil pickups. And there are numerous YouTube videos that can help you with pencil pickups. You can learn how to do them and you can show them to your students. Some of them have nice little songs that go with them. Now, fine motor control is another skill that may require development. Hand strengthening and pencil control are two key factors. Most preschool and kindergarten programs provide activities to develop hand and finger strength. However, many kids these days are doing less fine motor activities at home and even sometimes at school and spending more time on devices. For students struggling with writing, it may be helpful to give them some opportunities to do some hand strengthening activities. I've had them pull beans out of putties, squeeze exercisers, twirl a spherical bead between their thumb and forefinger, or move pom-poms with kid tweezers. Occupational therapy websites can give you lots of activities to develop hand strength. Pencil control also needs to be developed. Lots of coloring with pencil crayons, not markers, not crayons, can be very beneficial. Demonstrate how to use smaller strokes and stay in the lines. Pencil control sheets from Sparklebox, which are free, provide images for coloring and practice exercises to help students develop the strokes they need for printing letters. Hand strengthening and pencil control activities can be done as a warm-up for letter formation lessons and printing practice. When you teach letter formation, move from gross motor to fine motor and big to small. For example, air writing, forming the letter in the air with the pointer finger, tracing the letter on desks with a finger, writing the letter on the left hand with the right finger. Reverse that, of course, for lefties. And tracing the letter written on scrub pads, writing in sand trays. Just do that with a small group or you get sand everywhere. Painting the letter with watercolor paints, using paint sticks, or writing the letter on chalkboards. Whiteboards are not recommended because they're too slippery. Finally, move to writing with pencils on lines. So students need many brief practice sessions, brief and frequent. One tip I came across for doing this with the whole class is to run a letter formation video of the targeted letter while the teacher walks around and gives corrective feedback. So they're seeing a loop of the video, of the letter formation video, lots of them on YouTube. Corrective feedback means erasing poorly formed letters and having the student try again. Let the students know ahead of time that you will be doing this so they are prepared for it. You might want to give the eraser you use a catchy little name like the letter inspector, and you can even draw a little face on the eraser. Ask the students to loop the letter that they feel was their best. Brief practice means 1 or 2 lines of letters or a short word using the letters that have been practiced. Each letter should be copied from a model. I will walk you through some examples of handwriting programs and what to look for when you choose one. So Jan Olson is the creator of the Handwriting Without Tears program, which I was trained in, and we will look at that program shortly. Here's what I learned from Jan. Letters should be formed using continuous strokes with minimal lifting of the pencil to ensure efficient formation. There should be a model for each letter because when students have just one model at the beginning of a line, their letters tend to worsen as they progress. Letters should be grouped according to how they are formed. So in Handwriting Without Tears, they call one group magic C letters, and it's C-A-D-G-O because all of them can start with the same formation, a C. Another group would be R, N, M, H. I will speak briefly about each of these programs or approaches. Danielian uses 3 lines dotted in the middle. It does have continuous stroke letters and they have a little tail to help transition to cursive. And you can see some of the letters resemble cursive letters. If you look at the K in the word stroke, it already looks like a cursive K. This program is literally called ball and stick. The strokes are not continuous. Dr. Pfeiffer and most occupational therapists do not recommend this method. The letters are in alphabetical order rather than grouped by formation. The older Zahner-Bloser program used this approach, but they seem to have changed to using continuous strokes. So Handwriting Without Tears, never been totally crazy about that name, but it's an awesome program. It was developed by Jan Olson, occupational therapist. It's very comprehensive, systematic, and explicit. It utilizes many multisensory techniques such as air writing that we talked about earlier, chalkboards with small wet sponges used to draw letters, and also chalkboards with chalk. And it has wooden pieces used to construct letters. It progresses from gross motor to fine motor. And it uses these double lines, which I've never seen in any other program. I have been finding that the double lines are problematic for some students because they need more explicit reference points at the top and the bottom. So I had a student with ADHD who really struggled with printing. That prompted me to do some research into teaching printing to children with ADHD. And I found a website OT for ADHD. This OT recommended the sky, grass, ground technique. It uses the continuous stroke method. There are 3 or 4 lines, depending on the version of it. There's one with sky, grass, and what I call curb. It's a black line, and dirt or ground underneath it. On OT for ADHD, there is a link to Teachers Pay Teachers, where you can purchase the materials designed by this OT. There are also free materials on sparklebox.co.uk. You can use the multisensory gross motor to fine motor techniques from Handwriting Without Tears, and then use these lines if you have students who need more reference points for letter formation. I've been using this method with a number of my struggling printers, and I have seen some good improvement. I have not yet found a good workbook that has these lines. I may end up making one. Students need to have efficient, fluent printing. After working on letter formation, they need to increase the rate at which they print. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be automatic and legible. First, students practice printing quickly. I started by having them print the alphabet from a model. Then I moved them to printing the alphabet without a model. Both of those situations seem to be somewhat taxing on their working memory. So I tried using a short word that has a small, tall, and drop-down letter, such as dog or job. I often used a word with D or B because many of my students still confuse these letters, and it provided extra practice. Corrective feedback was given. We did a small amount of practice during each lesson. I had the students again loop their best letter. After sufficient practice, we did timed letter writing. So you time students while they print for 1 minute, and then they graph their results. Tell the students ahead of time that incorrectly formed or placed letters will not count. Have them print the alphabet or a short word that you have selected. After a minute is up, circle any incorrectly formed or placed letters. If you're doing this with a whole class, you can pair them up and have them circle for each other, but you will need to practice a routine with specific criteria with the whole class before doing this. Students then count and graph the number of correctly written letters in 1 minute. Alternate between printing practice and timed letter writing. So some days are practice days and other days are timing and graphing days. Students should have several practice opportunities before doing a timing. I found that the graphing process was highly motivating, and my students saw some really good success. Now, I will move on to the other foundational skill, spelling. I could do a whole presentation just on spelling. So I will touch on some key points about spelling instruction and leave it at that. Spelling instruction needs to be systematic and explicit and include review or spiraling. Students need to work on both encodable words, so words you can sound out, and irregular words such as said, the, is. There should be a scope and sequence chart, and the programs or approaches pictured in this slide tick off all those boxes. So in this slide, we have the UFly Foundations, that's the University of Florida Literacy Institute, and Orton Gillingham Teacher Manual, and Spelling Mastery, which is part of the Direct Instruction group of programs. I start spelling lessons with a grapheme retrieval activity. A grapheme is the written representation of a phoneme, which is the smallest unit of sound in language. Kids need to be automatic at picturing the grapheme in their head and writing it down. You can use different materials to do this activity to keep students engaged. And here I most often do it in the sand trays, but also they like to write on whiteboards, even though they're a bit slippery and it's not great for their printing. The chalkboards and watercolor paints or paint sticks. Whoops. Use a scope and sequence from Morton Gillingham or a program such as UFly Foundations. I was also just reading Next Steps in Literacy Instruction and found a nice scope and sequence. It's for reading, but because reading and spelling are so reciprocal, you could use that one too. The scope and sequence should include spelling patterns, rules, morphographs, and irregular words. Some students may need significantly more repetition to master patterns and rules. An effective method for introducing each pattern or rule is to use a guided word sorting activity pictured above or pictured in the slide. Students are asked to sort the words into 2 categories to figure out the sorting rule. Guide them until they figure out the pattern that you want them to learn. Orthographic mapping is the process we use to permanently store words into long-term memory. This would apply to both reading and spelling. So you should include activities to develop the orthographic mapping process. The brain needs to connect the phonemes or sounds to the graphemes, letters or clusters of letters. There are many different activities that support this process. Here are a few examples. Elkonin, I've also heard it pronounced Elkonin, boxes. Do lots of activities to develop orthographic mapping with words containing the target orthographic pattern and also some irregular words. Connecting the phonemes to the graphemes leads to instant word recognition. In this very simple activity, the teacher dictates words from the targeted spelling pattern. The students place a manipulative, such as a bingo chip, in the boxes to represent the phonemes. Then the students write 1 grapheme per box. So if the word was shop, the sh would go in 1 box, then ah in the next, and p in the third. Changing up the media that students use engages their brains. I created this example to show you how the Elkonin boxes work. There's not a target spelling pattern here. I included an irregular word. Irregular words need to be taught directly. Discuss the parts of the word that can be sounded out, and the tricky part you have to learn by heart, also called heart words. Underline the tricky part, or they can heart it, and you can see the word said. You can sound out s and d, but the eh is spelled ai. So we underline that, have the kids underline it, or put a heart around it or a heart underneath it to help them remember the tricky part. And notice that the silent E in take did not get its own box because it does not make a sound. So it's grouped in with the last letter in the word there. This is an activity done in the UFly Foundations program with a whole class. So students are told how many lines to draw, and then they fill in the graphemes for the word that has been dictated. This activity came in an editable spelling package from Teachers Pay Teachers. I drew in the boxes to support orthographic mapping. If you look in the number 2 section, build the word, that's where I put the boxes in. It didn't come like that. Hopping frogs. Oh, I dictate a word and students make the little frogs hop onto the lily pads, 1 for each phoneme, as they say the sounds. Then they write the grapheme in for each phoneme in the word. And you can see this is done in a page protector, and they write them in dry erase markers. This one I call structured whiteboard with poker chips because I didn't know what else to call it. Students represent phonemes by placing a poker chip over boxes and then write in the graphemes. All of the materials came from Dollarama. This is an example of a heart word or irregular word. You can see there's a little heart under the E because it says the, and it's irregular. So in addition to supporting orthographic mapping, it's also important to develop phonemic awareness and to connect the phonemes to the graphemes when doing so. Next, we will look at an effective technique for doing this. I also call this word changing because that's what we're doing. There are two ways to do this activity, and you should alternate between them when you do, anytime you do it. And I'll talk about the example shown here. So first ask the students to spell the word dog, then ask them to change ah to I and ask them to tell you the new word. Then ask them to change dig to make it say big. So this activity develops phonemic awareness, which is critical for both reading and spelling. It can be done with plastic letters on a little chalkboard or a whiteboard. UFly includes this activity in their lessons and in their parent homework package. Parents do need to be trained, and UFly includes a link to a video to help with that. After orthographic mapping and phonemic awareness activities, you want your students to apply the pattern or rule that they have been working on. You can practice applying a pattern or rule by dictating words and requiring students to fill them in on a sorting sheet. They must listen for the placement of the phonemes in the word. For example, do they hear the long O sound at the end of the word or in the middle? So that's for the, you see boat and grow in that example with the paint sticks there. And that's the OA in the middle, OW at the end pattern. I've had students use both paint sticks, which they love, and scratch cards from Dollarama. In the example you see here, I set up the scratch card because I have small groups and I can do that. With a whole class, you may want to have your class set up their own card. Another activity in which students must apply a rule or pattern is a word dictation or check-in. I use 10 words and a sentence. And for the check-in, choose words featuring the current orthographic pattern you've been working on, some review words, and some irregular words. It can also be called a show what you know, and I've actually redone the sheet since I took this photo, and the show what you know version is included in your package. So games and activities for spelling practice, because some of those kiddos need a lot of extra practice to consolidate. And use games to provide that extra practice after you've done orthographic mapping, word chaining, and more intensive drill experiences. Games can be good for a change of pace and to develop social skills and executive functioning. Editable games allow you to differentiate and customize games. These examples are from Teachers Pay Teachers, which has many different ones available at pretty reasonable prices. Look at the games critically to ensure that there is student engagement and sufficient practice. So in this slide, you can see Feed the Frog. Students flip over cards and spell the words aloud. They place their cards on their frog's tongue There are 3 alligator cards, require them to put back a card to make it exciting. Matching games. You can make these by writing words on index cards. I used an editable games resource from Teachers Pay Teachers, This Reading Mama. That's probably the best $20 US I have ever spent. And there's a reference in your package. For spelling practice, students flip a card, read the word, and then spell it aloud. Each student flips 2 cards, attempting to collect matches. Tic-tac-toe. Students spell the word aloud before placing an X or an O in the space. This tic-tac-toe game was purchased at Dollarama, and I made the cards using that same editable program from This Reading Mama. Connect 4. I have an editable version so I can target a spelling pattern or rule or throw in some irregular words. Students read and spell the word as they place their chip on it. The first student to get 4 in a row wins. With all of these games, you can add an extra level where students read the word, close their eyes, and then try to spell it correctly. Roll and write. You can write words that target a specific spelling pattern on a blank cube. This slide shows short A words. Students roll the cube and record the word on the sheet. This one I just made myself. There are many different versions of editable board games available on Teachers Pay Teachers. They also come in black and white, or you can print them and put them in page protectors. Students roll a dice or spin a spinner, move their player, then write the word they land on. I like to use bingo chips as the player because they are transparent and they don't block the view of the word. And students can do this in pairs or individually, and it gives them extra written practice. We've looked at methods for developing the foundational skills. Now, how do we know if there's been an impact on our students' written fluency and output? When I began to look for strategies to develop written fluency, I came across information about CBM-WE, or curriculum-based measures of written expression. I'm very familiar with CBM assessments for reading, but had never seen one for writing. I was intrigued. What does CBM-WE measure? It measures the total number of words written, correctly spelled words, and correct writing sequences. It is a time snapshot of foundational writing skills, a 3-minute snapshot. CBM-WE does not measure the quality of the writing with respect to creativity, word use, paragraph structure. A writing rubric is required for that type of assessment. It does measure the quantity of written output, fluency, spelling, and some basic grammar. So the total words written and the correctly spelled words are fairly obvious to understand. Correct writing sequences are a bit more complex. So a correct writing sequence is any 2 adjacent correct units of writing. A correct unit is a correctly spelled word that is also grammatically correct in the context of the sentence, or correctly placed capitals and punctuation. Any 2 correct written units are counted as a correct sequence. There are criteria to determine what counts as a spelling error and what counts as a correct writing sequence. I found that the criteria vary slightly depending on the assessment you're using or the source of information you look at. So I looked at Ames Web, which is a universal screener that includes this CBMWE. I looked at something I found called the Early Writing Project. I looked at a book called The ABCs of CBMs and interventioncentral.org. So each correct writing sequence is marked with a blue caret, and you can see those carets on this sample. So the CBMWE lets you see whether the foundational skills are automatic or whether a lack of mastery is slowing down a student. If a student falls below the cut rate for risk, look at the printing and spelling in the samples. Remediation may be required in one or both of these areas. So this is just a brief summary. There's a lot more information on interventioncentral.org on conducting a CBMWE. You start by selecting a story starter or probe to give to students, and they have free ones at this website. After telling students the probe, give them 1 minute to think about what they will write. Then allow 3 minutes of writing time. You collect them and score them. So this can be done whole class, and it's really quite short and efficient. Now, how to score a CBMWE. You count the total number of words written, and there are places to fill this in at the bottom of the page, but I had cut that off. Count the correctly spelled words, and you underline incorrectly spelled words in red. Draw blue carets after each correct writing sequence. Count the number of correct writing sequences. I spent a lot of time when I first started doing this with the scoring guides beside me, and I was looking things up constantly to make sure that I was doing it correctly. So the score for this sample would be total words written 18, correctly spelled words 13, and correct writing sequences 10. Next, you want to compare the scores to the norms. So this is a little chart I made based on information from the ABCs of CBM by Hosp and Howell, and it is the Ames Web 2015 norms. The interventioncentral.org has information and materials you can use for conducting a CBM, but the norms they provide are old, I think like 2003 or 2007, something like that. Ames Web has norms from 2015. The sample you saw was from a grade 2 student in the spring, and the total words written were 18, correctly spelled words 13, and correct writing sequences 10. If you look at the spring benchmarks in the Ames Web norms chart, total words written should be 13, correctly spelled words 24, correct writing sequences 21. So this student is below the cut rate for risk and would require remediation. Keeping charts like this one for each class allows me to see if students are making progress or meeting the benchmarks, and it allows me to adjust my remediation lessons accordingly. It's also helpful for making teachers aware of the needs of their class if you are not a classroom teacher. There is a blank version of this in your package. So the correct writing sequences measure gives an indication of whether a student is creating grammatically correct sentences. This opened up a whole new rabbit hole for me to explore. What is the most effective way to teach young children to write correct sentences? Current research suggests that a technique called sentence combining is effective. You will see that in The Writing Revolution by Hockman and Wexler and a number of other texts I've read. However, combining sentences would require students to first understand how to write a very simple sentence. Many students cannot tell me why dog ran is a sentence and the dog is not. They think that any group of words framed by a capital and a period is a sentence. So I am working on solving this dilemma and trying to figure out how to teach this to young children, and hopefully we'll be able to share some results next year. Thank you so much for watching this webinar. I hope that I've inspired you to implement some new strategies in your classroom or intervention practice and to go on and learn even more about written fluency. It's such an important skill for our students to have.
So thank you so much for that incredible presentation. I loved how you had your own questions sort of guide your research and guide where your attention went and all the rabbit holes you're going down. It's quite inspiring for us to see. I love that. Just let's start at the very beginning of your presentation where you went through the typical stages of development of writing skills. What do you do if you notice a student is not progressing through the skills as you expected? What's step one?
Well, it depends on what stage they're at. To get them through some of those skills, oral language fluency or oral language development is very important. And the other thing is teaching them to print and making sure that they are learning those letters. Any occupational therapist will tell you that they should start with uppercase letters and then move to lowercase letters. In reading, people tend to start to teach the lowercase first. So there's always that, that little piece to figure out. I'm actually still looking into figuring that out as well to advise our kindergarten team on that. But that's where I would start, is the letter recognition and the printing.
Great place to start on those basic skills. Wonderful. So, how much time per day do you think should be dedicated to building these handwriting skills versus, reading instruction? So, if literacy block is a limited amount of time, so what's the ratio between writing versus reading instruction?
I keep the printing piece very short. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it depends a little bit. If we're working on letter formation, that might take a little bit longer. I might spend a bit more time on that. But it should be short and frequent. So 5 minutes at the beginning for the printing piece. Spelling takes a little bit longer, but spelling and reading are reciprocal skills. So teaching spelling helps kids with their reading as well. And if you look at a program like UFly or Reading Mastery, they integrate both spelling and reading together. So that should be the rest of your literacy block.
So you do recommend that integration of reading and writing as those reciprocal skills build on each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's even at a higher level, lots of evidence that having kids write helps with reading comprehension because they're starting to understand sentence structure and paragraph structure, and that helps them with their comprehension. But that's at a higher level than I was looking at today.
Amazing. Well, I know for myself, I don't do a lot of handwriting anymore. I do a lot of typing. And I, took up journaling again, and my hand is so tired. How do you build up that strength in these small children to be able to physically do the action of writing, not only come up with the ideas and make the shapes?
Yeah, so I showed one slide where I had some materials. Now I've, been able to order them because I'm at an independent school from different companies. But anything you can find, like silly putty from Dollarama, they have squeezy things at the dollar stores as well, and just squeezing and manipulating items using their thumb and forefinger will help them a lot with that hand strength and finger strength. And coloring with pencil crayons really, really helps. I had a student who really struggled with printing, and over the summer, she colored and colored and colored. And when she came back the next year and we started working on the printing again, it went so easily. And now she prints like a teacher.
Incredible. Going back to the different styles of learning how to print, you mentioned that letters that are easily connected to each other are better to teach. That brings up the question of cursive writing. I know it's being phased out of a lot of curriculum and not many people are teaching it anymore. Do you think cursive writing is beneficial or is it a confusing process for children? Where do you stand on that?
Well, cursive actually, I believe, has been put back into the Ontario curriculum. What you need cursive for is to develop a signature, and you should be able to read it. And if you learn to write it, you can read it. When I talk about handwriting with young children, I'm focused more on the printing part because what you read is print, not cursive for the most part. And there's a neurological connection when you are physically forming letters that helps you remember them.
Wonderful. Yeah. One last question before we let you go. I know you were focused largely on, our very young students, kindergarten, grade one, grade two, but the population we're dealing with, students with learning disabilities, sometimes do progress to the higher grades not having these skills to print, to spell, to generate writing. So, what would you do with an older student? Because I know some of these exercises would feel a little kiddish for some of our students.
With an older student, I would, I found a really great program called the Printing Repair Program, and it's actually geared for older students. And it starts with bigger capital letters and moves towards smaller capitals, and then it does the same thing with the lowercase. But it uses bigger words, and it doesn't look babyish. So I had grade 3 and some grade 4 students. Post-pandemic, there was a lot of need for printing remediation, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And I had some grade 3 and 4 students work in this program, and they were very receptive to it. So I imagine just from the look of the program that even grade 5, 6, 7 students would be fine with it because it's also been used with, it was designed to be used with both kids and adults.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that resource. So I think that is all the time we have for questions today. But thank you so much again, Jenny, for sharing all this information with us, for showing how your own curiosity has led you to some great interventions and how the teachers watching today can put those into use in their classroom. Thank you so much.